me singing a solo. That's not what that's intended to do. So we do miss that part of it. But we're looking forward when we do get together again to speak to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, making melody in our hearts to the Lord. And what a fellowship and what a worship to God that will be. Until then, we encourage you to sing and worship with your family. And now we're going to turn our attention to the Word of God, to Psalm 23. Last week we looked at the Lord is my shepherd. What pride David had. As a former shepherd and now a king, he could write a psalm and say that he had a shepherd. And that shepherd could be identified. The Lord is my shepherd. When you look at Psalm 23, you're looking at a piece of writing that is 3,000 years old. Think about that. There are books that are old. You know what the library does with old books? Well, often they will sell those books because they're making room for new books. The Bible talks about the making of books. There's no end. The making of many books, and much study is weariness of the flesh, and it just seems the printing presses never stop. And now we're in the digital age, and there's more content than ever. And yet old books do have their place, especially those that survive and become classics. There's no greater, no older book than the Bible, and we're turning to the words of God that have been preserved 3,000 years, and we can read as Christians this psalm, things concerning Christ. Because while the Lord is my shepherd, David said, we as Christians can look to Jesus as the good shepherd and say the Lord Jesus is my shepherd. David would have pride in his voice as he would say, the Lord is my shepherd. Here's a shepherd who needed a shepherd. If you turn to 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 4, you read about the chief shepherd. This was the elders who were shepherds of the local churches. They needed leadership too. And Jesus was the chief shepherd. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 25 talks about Jesus being our chief shepherd and the bishop or overseer of our souls. And so David, while he was a shepherd of sheep and a king of people, he could say, the Lord, he is my shepherd. And we can say that too. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That is what we're going to look at today, I shall not want. What does this mean? Well, it is a small phrase, but this is exactly what the entire psalm is about. We're not going to have necessity. We're not going to have a lack of things because the Lord won't allow this. I'm going to explain this. Don't take me at that and just say, okay, the lesson's over, because this needs explanation. What does it mean, I shall not want? It doesn't mean that if you're following the Lord, you're going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise and have no more problems. We'll leave that kind of false teaching to Joel Osteen and others who talk about you can have your best life now. He wrote a book with that title, and he's a false teacher. Now, he may smile, he may be friendly looking, but he leads thousands into the darkness of false teaching. We don't want our best life now. I mean, we can have an abundant life now, John 10 verse 10, but our best life comes after this life. And there is no doubt about that. So don't let anyone mislead you into thinking that because you follow the Lord, your problems are over. Because you follow the Lord, you'll never lack anything. That's not what this is teaching. What did David mean? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not lack. Let me give you some other translations of this. Another translation says, I shall not want, I lack nothing. I have all that I need. I have what I need. Namely, I shall not want anything that is really necessary for me, either in this life or the next. So, I want to give this an asterisk, because he is talking about we're not going to lack physical things or spiritual things. But why do I put an asterisk here? Because this needs explanation. We will lack some things along life's way. Even David did. When David was a king, you'd say, well, he was wealthy beyond his imagination, and he probably was. But yet, even as king, he had to run from his son Absalom, who was trying to take over as king. Run for his life as a fugitive. But even before all that, after he had been blessed as a young shepherd, he had to run from King Saul. He had been blessed by King Saul, was even in King Saul's household, and yet he had to later run for his life from the king and hide out in caves. So how could David write a psalm that would say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want"? Well, he was not talking about physical deprivations from time to time. Job was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, and yet no one was treated more horribly than Job. Now, not by God, but the devil mistreated Job in order to try to shake him loose from his faith and trust in God. Job, in one sense, lacked. In another sense, he lacked nothing. It is that sense in which David is writing this psalm. Yes, Job lacked proper health. He had boils from his head to his feet. His children were taken away through death. He lost his wealth. He lost his friends. He lost a lot of things. The trust of his wife. A lot of these things left Job, and he was lacking in material things. But he lacked nothing spiritually, because the God that he trusted in was the God that remained trustworthy to Job. It was not God who was mistreating Job. It was the devil. The devil was behind it all along. Because the Lord was Job's shepherd, Job did not lack, because God saw him through the valley of the shadow of death. And that's exactly what David says in this very psalm. He said, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." And so that is the point of lacking nothing. We lack nothing that is necessary for us, either in this life or the next, in order for God to give us what we need. Now, we may not have everything we want. In fact, there are those who pray for things they think they need when it's actually just a want or a desire. There are people who pray to be healthy and wealthy and wise. And God may not allow that person to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, because if he did, it would not be good for them. They would use their health to forget God. They would use their wealth in ungodly ways, and their wisdom to deceive others. And so God would not allow that person to have those things, but might allow deprivation to come into their life in order to teach them. Jesus put it this way in John 16:33. He said, "In this world you shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I've overcome the world." And before he said that, he said, "I've come that you might have peace." That kind of peace can see a person through a storm. That kind of peace can help a person in trouble. Because he says, "In this world you shall have trouble," or tribulation. "But be of good cheer. I've overcome the world." So that's the spirit in which David said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. I shall want nothing." A little girl had this right. When she went to church, she heard the 23rd Psalm taught, and her mother asked her, said, "What did you learn in Bible class?" And she said, "Well, we learned about the Lord is my shepherd, and I won't want any more." And she got it right. She's not going to want for anything anymore, because the Lord is going to take care of what's really important in that little girl's life. And that is the spirit of this psalm. In fact, that's what this psalm is all about. Just 117 words. And yet it encapsulates in a memorable way, in a beautiful way, the fact that if we trust God, God will take care of us. It's said in another way in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. it says, for all things, God works all things together for good to them that love the Lord, to them that are called according to his purpose. Now, I believe that Romans 8 is speaking in regard to our ultimate salvation in heaven. And God is not going to let us be captured by the devil or any other foe. Not anything can rise up against God's saving power through Christ. And what we find is God can work everything together for good. And sometimes he does that through his providence in other areas of life. God will take the negative setbacks of life and work them together for good. And so we can trust in the Lord being our shepherd, and that we will not want because he's in charge. Psalm 34 verse 9 says something very similar. There is no want to those who fear the Lord. Others are far wealthier and wiser than other Christians, and yet all Christians are not going to want. We are going to find what others are not finding. Let me give you a couple examples. There are two famous rock and roll people out in the world, or musicians. One has a famous song called "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." And it's a silly song. I think in the song he talks about he can't get his clothes clean because he can't get no satisfaction from the soap suds. But really what he's saying in this song is, in this world he can't find anything that satisfies. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes is about. Life under the sun does not satisfy. He says the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear satisfied with hearing. That's why they're always producing new movies, new content, new pictures, because there's not one picture, one movie that can capture the eye and satisfy it. That's why the ear, there can't be the perfect song. They have to keep producing new songs. We get tired of the old ones because the ear is not filled with hearing. There's no satisfaction under the sun as far as this world is concerned. Other singers have put out songs about it. There was another woman who put out, or a woman who put out a song called Constant Craving. And it was, she came out later as a homosexual. And it's no surprise that she would have a song that would talk about a constant craving, going after something that will not satisfy. In the Old Testament, God talked about those who would dig cisterns for themselves that could hold no water, and they had forsaken the fountain of living waters. They'd forsaken God and had dug for themselves broken cisterns that could hold no water. That's what people do when they depart from God and they go out and seek other alternative ways of doing life. And they come up with constant craving that cannot be satisfied. And there are other songs that the world expresses this same idea about not being able to find satisfaction. They're singing about it, but there's no solution. But there is a solution with those who follow the Good Shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That means I won't lack for things I really need, especially in the spiritual realm. If I lack things physically, it won't be because God's turned his back on me. John the Baptist had to do without. Elijah had to do without. Jeremiah was thrown in a cistern and had to be pulled out with ropes.